So good afternoon. This is Anto Budiarjo, and welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday, and I say exactly the same thing every Monday. It's getting a little bit monotonous. So
Time to change it, Anton.
yeah,
Time to
indeed.
change it up.
Some legalistic stuff needs to say. So the panelists, our profiles are on mondaylive.org, and the most important part of this slide is the views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. I think by now everybody knows how to use the Zoom tools. And also this deck is available on mondaylive.org if you want to refer to it during or after the call. This month's focus theme is new market dynamics. So we've been talking about this all month. This is the last one of the month because next week is Memorial Day and we're going to be dark. This is our agenda today, our normal chit chat. Following last week's conversation, what we decided is to continue that and to try and sort of figure out this whole sort of beachhead concept. So more of that in a minute. Before that, some slides. I'm going to hand it over to Ken for a brief sort of comment on this, and then we move on. Ken?
Sure. Okay. We're working on our June issue, which is pushing digital dinosaurs, and I think we're all a bit of that, and we need to change. And getting some interesting articles, having a lot of fun with it. It's working out well. Ended up watching the General Magic movie that Therese recommended a few sessions back. And I thought it was a great accounting of the necessary failures before success. And I think even though we're all running very successful businesses, in the light and scope of IT, they're kind of failures because we're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people or 50,000 people rather than millions. So when we cross the chasm, we're going to have some bumps and grinds. And General Magic does a great job of showing what happens when people get there too soon and they don't have the infrastructure to support their dreams. I think in some ways we might be a little bit there. And our General Magic, we now need to daily evolve in the rapid world of AI, AR, mobile experience, and what's next. And our services will be mixed in ways that we cannot now imagine. That became very obvious from the movie is they were doing neat stuff, but they had no idea what the neat stuff would actually be used for. And then it turned into amazing companies, and the people who were bringing these ideas all ended up in very significant positions in the IoT industry. So it's an interesting documentary. I think it's well worth watching. It also reminded me of the startup automated buildings. In 1990, we were in San Francisco chatting and trying to find out what was going on with all of this stuff because we saw that the internet would be a big part of what we were doing. And just as recent as 1990, we had browser wars, search engine wars, who would be internet providers, the dot-com scramble, dot-bomb over investment in vaporware, the concept of large buildings as an eternal internet identity. That was actually our first article in 1999. And it's interesting that we kind of got that part right, but if you actually read through the article, some of the other stuff that we were predicting didn't quite turn out the way we thought, like who would be the ISP providers. So lots of stuff happening. I kind of feel that the time and space we're in right now, and what I wrote 22 years ago is still true. I'd better get on with my life vacation of trying to catch up. Back to you.
Thank you. And I have watched that General Magic movie, and it is quite interesting. I would recommend everybody to watch it. And hands up anybody that actually purchased one of those General Magic devices. Nobody. I did.
Yeah.
I think they sold like 8,000 and I have one of them. I still have it. Anyway, moving on. John.
Hey, I think though that Ken may have identified the challenge and the problem we're having.
we know what our technology can be used for and how it can help building owners. They, as he said somewhere along the lines, they didn't know what it might end up being used for. Maybe that's the problem. We know what it can be used for. So, anyways, I want to revisit this subject, which we've had as a theme weaving through a lot of our conversations, which is the growth in interest, which is a positive thing for the specific technologies we're all involved with, but the growth and interest around carbon tracking, carbon reporting, reducing carbon, ESG, energy efficiency, all really different kind of viewpoints on the same thing. And this was interesting. It came from GreenBiz today, showing just the impact it's having in the financial circles. And that's what matters, right? Because we've often bemoaned the challenges of conveying to the financial decision makers the value of our technologies, right? And here they're focusing on things that are soft, right? Not I don't mean not important, but they're hard to put your hand around and quantify, right? And yet more and more they're doing it because they feel there's a need to, right? So this may be one of those transition trends that's going to continue to be helpful for our industry, helping buildings be more efficient and understand what their impact is on the environment.
Great, thank you. Gina.
Okay, so I just thought this article from the Atlantic was very interesting. And this what bosses really think of remote workplace or remote working. And everyone on this call here, this impacts us because, on one hand, our business is commercial real estate. So we want people back in the office. What happens when people aren't using the commercial real estate, right? So this article had looked at a bunch of surveys that were recently done and actually talked to, a few people recently and asked their opinion. And I thought that this was kind of interesting. The first two statements, or most of these statements, I believe that work is better when most people are in the office together, and the most engaged workers are the ones who want to work from the office most of the time. Surprisingly, the people that made those statements are actually people that either own commercial property or property managers. Just add that in there. The other thing was that this is a survey said that most respondents said that people that work from home are actually more productive than when they were in the office. The flip side of that, the thought was bosses are less likely to promote someone that they're not seeing on a daily basis, and that people that work remotely are paid less money over time, and their salary increases and their ability to become leaders in a company are less because of that. Personally, I disagree with that statement, but you also have to think of it. They said that actually, if you look at the people that actually do go into the office every day, they have to pay to live closer. They usually are more in urban environments, blah, blah. So sometimes it's a wash. And then there was the belief that if you wanted to move up, you had to be in the office and be seen and be heard. And then the last person that they interviewed actually was from a software technology company. And his thing was having a building really enables lazy leaders. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to say. But his thing was, if you have to walk around and see whether or not people are productive or doing their job, that's kind of a lazy way to manage. You should be able to manage regardless of where the person or the individual is. So it's actually a really neat article and very interesting. And it's probably something that maybe on our Wednesday calls, we kind of can debate this. I think personally for me as someone who's worked remotely, I'm by far more productive. I don't necessarily feel like I lose out on anything. And if I do, I think it's very minuscule and, but has buildings really enabled lazy leaders?
That's a weird one.
That was a weird one, so I thought
I think that's really interesting because think back about,
too.
I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago when there was this big theme of people who manage by walking around.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's they do. They stop by everybody's office, and now we're saying, that's gone, right? We don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Actually,
those
we
guys,
just-
by the way, John, those guys are called, that's called seagull management. Fly in, squawk, poop on everybody and leave.
But it was a
today-
big trend, right? There were business books written about some of the great leaders. I can't remember who, but there were some real notable leaders, and that's how they did it, by pooping.
But today we've gone high tech. We just do it with security cameras.
Yeah, there you go.
That's, and it's all integrated. And I guess, Gino, just a comment on this. Good find. I guess to me, does this all go back to one thing, which is the company culture? And if the culture cannot change, then you know what? We'll see where that company is in 5-10 years from now, as far as their progress in business and so forth and so on.
Well, the person that made the comment about the lazy leaders, he actually said that, Mark, in the very end. He basically said, the ones that have to have it that way are not, you're going to have to drag them into the future. So he being a software company, he said, I don't care if anybody ever comes back to the office ever again, right? He says, I can manage and I can make my people productive. But he did say that. He said, the ones that have to have you back in the office, he says the future will show that, that they have to be dragged there, and it's not necessarily the best thing for the culture of the company, because they'll lose people. They'll lose good people to other companies that have that flexibility, I think.
And they won't attract new blood either. So I think,
Well, the key word is the good people, right?
Yeah.
The good.
sure.
It's the good ones who leave.
Yeah, I think, guys, the challenge in all of this, if you think about it, is that 20 years ago or so, for all intents and purposes, there was no internet, there was no video conferencing like we have today. There was no Zoom, right? So the only option was to go into a building. You didn't have, if you could just erase the history and point in time and say, everybody can collect in a building, or majority of people can work from home and come in and see each other occasionally, and we use technology for our day-to-day activities, which way would you go? But because we've gradually over 20 years evolved to where internet is cheap, ubiquitous, fast, and we've gone from Cisco video conferencing in specialized rooms with very expensive gear to Zoom and Zoom equivalents, we actually have a choice. Now, there's certain businesses like manufacturing that need to have the people there, but for office workers, you really got to question whether the model holds up. Other than my concern is, how do you train new people coming into the industry if you're not physically around them? That's my only risk. But for anybody who's established, sure seems like you can work very well from home.
Okay, let's
just a quick one on that. The bigger question is it shaking the whole model of the office worker? Why do we have office workers? And just a quick one is, Anto and I were at Intel probably about 10 years ago, and I found it interesting. They did a survey, and the bosses determined that about 15% of their people could work remote. They did the same survey to the employees, and the employees said 75 to 80.
Wow,
so that was interesting.
Well,
bosses' jobs is to basically keep track of the people, keep them all in the chicken coop.
make them productive. Over to you, Roger.
Yeah, it's kind of on a similar theme, really. There was a couple of surveys out, one by Cushman & Wakefield and the other one by KPMG, and it was interesting to see they kind of came to some similar conclusions, but they're kind of saying, the death of the office was greatly exaggerated because people haven't moved. And the Cushman & Wakefield one was really more about talent on the move, where people are living and working. And they're saying that, there is some movement of people, but not huge amounts, and businesses certainly don't seem to be moving. So the bottom graph there is based on the gateway type markets, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, and so on. And just sort of saying, okay, there is some movement, but not huge. And I think it's, as it says in the bottom line there, all the discussion about pandemic creating large shifts is kind of been overstated at the moment. And I think on the right there, you can see the KPMG service in August 2020, 69% of CEOs said they were planning to downsize. And in March 21, they're now saying only 17% are saying that. Now, is that because they don't know the answer yet? They're not sure. And I think the workers have increasingly been crammed in from 1990 to 2020 by about 40% smaller space. But clearly, as going forward, people are going to be expecting more space. So is it really just saying, okay, there may be some movement, but we're going to need more office space? My own feeling is that really people are still unsure how to do it. Most people I've spoken to who can work from home have said they would like the hybrid solution, whether it's a 3 and a 2 or a 2 and a 3, so they'd like to go into the office, but would prefer to actually be at home for at least 3 days or so. So I sense there will be, this hybrid model. And I think that people have still got their leases riding at the moment and would cost them quite a lot of money to get out of them. So maybe they're just thinking, okay, we've got some time to think about this, but let's kind of park it and revisit it as and when, maybe over the next year, 18 months, as our leases begin to run out.
Okay, thank you.
Just one comment is the diminishing space over time. Is that because people are actually denser in tighter spaces, or is it that they're coming in 1 or 2 days? So they're sharing accommodation. So therefore, 2 people are using the same footage as they were using in 1990.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of bits there on that, Ken. I think one, people did start, getting rid of single office space, so people had more open plan. I think there was, as you say, the more use of perhaps, some hot desking, but, it was decreasing slowly. And I think people did just start cramming people in. And I think, the double-decker desk never really came, but I'm sure some people will try to use it.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on, it's very interesting. Beginning of this month, we started this building ratings survey. As of today, we have like 20 of them listed. So I don't know what we were expecting, but that's what we have. I don't know how exhaustive this list is. We'll keep it open. What are your thoughts about?
Isn't that depressing, having 20 already? If we have more, I mean, is more a good thing? I don't know. This is like standards all over again.
You mean, is it depressing that there are as many as 20, or is it that there are not more than 20?
No, it's depressing there are as many as 20. I mean, how does a building owner keep up with this list of 20 plus?
Yeah, I
I'd
agree.
be depressed.
I'm not surprised there's that many, but I'll say that's what I was afraid of.
Yeah, right.
That there's that many. And yeah, I think those analogies are good, Anno. And I think it isn't just the owner. How do manufacturers, suppliers, they can't possibly, participate in every one of them, So, the ones that will participate will be the ones that the owners and, make the most noise about. But it's a good thing that people are addressing this, but that's a pretty messy thing for building owners and vendors to get behind.
It'll be interesting if we have this conversation a year from now, how many on this list are still truly around and actually move the needle in some degree.
Mark, standards never die.
I didn't say all of them would die. I didn't say all.
No, they'll all be there. Is my point. Every one of them, whether they've been widely adopted or not.
I've just sorted it by dates. Half of them are within the last 3 years.
Oh, that makes it worse.
It gets back to the motivation and reason behind them. Are they for-profit kinds of things, or are they nonprofits that are putting these forward? When we dive into this, that's one of the things I'm very interested in understanding.
What's the motivation? I agree.
Let's add a column.
Yep.
motivation. Okay, great. We'll keep this up at that link, and we'll no doubt talk about it, touch on this on and off. So this being the last show of May, we're gonna start thinking about June. This is not the official theme of it yet, but it's something along this line. Who's gonna do what? Now that maybe we have a little bit more clarity, having spent this month talking about market dynamics. So interesting, that will start on June the 7th, after Memorial Day. So meanwhile, for today, we're going to talk about new market dynamics. And last week we talked about the technology adoption life cycle, and this big scary chasm that's there, and the difference between a product and a whole product. So that was very interesting. There was another component that we touched on last week, which is the beachhead sort of concept. And so where does that come from? Well, back in 1944, this is the map of Europe. It was pretty scary. We were the blue and they were the red. They were more red than blue. So they, the powers that be, decided to have a beachhead strategy, which is kind of, I believe, where the name came from. They identified a location, and they basically threw a lot of force at that sort of strategy. So that's really what beachhead is all about. So if we are serious as a collective to try and sort of figure out how we're going to get smarts into buildings at scale, we got to figure this out. We've got to figure out what is our beachhead. All right. So I was sort of collating all of the different sort of writings and essays from Jeffrey Moore and others, and came up with this list that I think is relevant for us in terms of how we sort of measure whether something is a beachhead or not. I'm going to go through that sort of briefly. One is it's really to do with the pain. Does that group within the beachhead have enough of a problem, of a painful problem to act? That's usually the first one in terms of identifying whether something is a beachhead or not. The size is important. It can't be too small and it can't be too large. You know, with the Normandy, it was Normandy. It was not one beach. It was not the whole of France, kind of thing. Access to the market is important. Can we reach them? All right. Can we reach specifically? Can we reach the decision makers? This number 4 is very, very important, which is really, do they talk amongst themselves with their peers about their problems? In other words, this tapped on one of the comments we talked about last week, that early adopters tend to look at visionaries, but majority people really look at their peers. Funding, do they have the budget to buy? That's kind of a duh. The whole product, do they consider the product as complete? It's not whether we consider it as complete, it's whether they do, they being whatever the beachhead people are. And in the perception, do they consider us as leaders in the field, whoever the vendor or the vendors are, and whether it aligns with our broader objectives and values. So this I propose as kind of being our filter as we talk about this for the remainder of this for the show. So with that, throw it out to the group. Let's figure out what a beachhead is for us.
I think one of the things about the beachhead concept, when you go back to the previous slide, is that, you know, the border is too long and too wide so you need focus, right? So the point about the beachhead is there's an initial focus and you bring all your forces to bear on that particular focus. The concept of size being big or small isn't really the size of the beachhead, but what lays beyond the beachhead, right? More so than the beachhead itself. So the beachhead may not actually be particularly large. It's the opportunity that emerges from beyond that beachhead that you need to look at. Some people, I've seen this before with the VC world, and they've done the same worlds. They, you know, what's your beachhead to get to the larger market, right? Rather than the beachhead itself being a thing of itself.
Right, but you have to consider both, right? The
Yeah,
beachhead itself has to be enough of a size to be interesting and matter. And then you're absolutely right. What's behind the beachhead is
the crucial piece.
I want to make a comment on the number one thing you listed is the paying enough to act, right? I think that's part of the problem is a lot of the technologies we are talking about and those of us, represent or involved with are the ones to identify that you have a problem, right? They may not realize they have any pain. And that's what we're trying to get them to. So it's, you can make an analogy over a medical problem that causes pain in my shoulder. I know I need something to be done versus some terrible disease that you don't know that it's developing inside you because it isn't creating any pain. Right. So I think that's one of our big barriers. Many people that I talk to, they don't know they have pain. And that's like the entry point for Jeffrey Moore. Well, there's our first problem.
That's why it's the first on the list. Any other thoughts on this list? Are we missing anything or?
I think the list is very good. So
something comes to mind with me is that when you're defining the problem, and if you go back to the other one, the war was a little simpler, that people wasn't more digital, that you were either on this side or that side. But what we're dealing with is cultural changes, and so if you ask the same question, you'll get a completely different answer from the folks over 50 and the folks under 50. They just see it completely different because they grew up in a different world. They see what we're doing is very painful and very labor intensive because they're used to doing things easily. So we have that kind of piece in there too. So I don't know if that's an actual item or how you actually deal with that.
Well, the beachhead doesn't have to be put it the other way around. The beachhead can actually be any kind of definition that works for you, right? One example that I read about is with digital cameras, the beachhead that the camera manufacturers decided to go after are basically women, specifically mothers. Think soccer moms and things. They're the ones that wanted the pictures in a certain way, right? Whereas all the men were arguing about megapixels and stuff. I mean, the women just want pictures of their kids. That's all. So that was their beachhead. So it was a demographics. So it could be demographics, it could be geographic, or it could be some kind of other thing. So you have to be a little bit creative in defining what the beachhead is.
So let me throw out a possible beachhead, see what you guys think. Okay. So we've talked in the past about managed services being an area that's potentially an area for growth in our industry, and have talked about what that means. So my suggested beachhead, I'll call it technology as a service. And so, how it is a managed service, and it would basically say to a building owner, I'll run your technology for you. Now, your technology could be narrow or it could be broad. It could be narrow, it could be just building automation system, building an HVAC, basically your HVAC, maybe your lights, or it could be broad, it could be everything that's technology oriented. But instead of you relying on your facility and relying on your contractors to provide support, we'll be your facilities engineering from a technology standpoint. Anything that needs to be installed, the equipment, the whole pulling of wire, that would go through normal channels as it does today. But the running of it, to make sure it all works and it gets optimized and is managed from a life cycle perspective, is all done as a managed service. And it would allow the owner to leverage an investment they already have in people to help pay for this service. So they'd be transferring a certain amount of their labor content to this technology as a service provider, and separating that from the capital side. Okay, and then the other budget that potentially I could see it absolutely grabbing is the energy budgets to help pay for this. Because if you're really providing technology as a service and you're looking at it from an energy perspective, you'd be able to grab a part of that energy spend, right? So you're looking at getting maintenance reduced, you're getting energy spend reduced, you're getting labor reduced, and you're providing a comprehensive technology as a service. And it's just a question of what quote unquote technologies buckets the owner wants to hand over to you. Like they might not want to give you fire and life safety, who knows, right? But they're more than willing to give you lights and HVAC and access control. Just so that's my what if concept.
So my immediate take to that is you're not, managed service isn't the beachhead, it's the people who would buy a managed service that are inclined to buy managed service is really the beachhead. Managed service is the delivery mechanism, right? So it's those people, and I don't know how you describe them, because one of the important thing about beachhead is you must be able to describe them as a homogeneous kind of thing.
So we're trying to define our beachhead as a specific audience, ideally, that we need to win over and sell, right?
Right.
So that can be first classified in a vertical market, and then as a subset within that, and even within a customer, it's not good enough to say big oil companies in the oil and gas industry. It needs to be operations managers of buildings within the oil and gas industry, right. Companies a bigger, of a larger size or something like that, ideally, right?
Yeah, that's the size thing that I know.
Yeah, there's another concept that we use in our planning called sandbox. So what's your sandbox that you play in, right? And you can define your sandbox as virtually anything. It could be Arizona, or it could be Phoenix, or it could be baseball stadiums across the country, or something, so I think we just got to figure out where are we wrapping here a little bit, maybe start a little broad and then kind of narrow in to identify specifically who are, going back to your list, who are the decision makers and so forth on that can do that, who has the spend authority to do that.
I would agree with what you just said, Tracy, in that I don't think there's one beachhead that we as an industry can define and go after. In other words, I think it is by segment, whether it be, to your point, retail, oil and gas, commercial real estate, government, or whatever, and then the individuals within who are on the beach that we need to convince, influence, and after we hear what they have to say, because I would think if you got 50, and I'll just use a number, 50 different folks who kind of make up folks standing on the beach we want to influence, that you will get close to 50 different answers depending on their industry, depending on their title type. Like a financial person, CFO, has different interest than a facility manager who has a different interest in other folks. So, but I think collectively, there's a formula there that for each of those, we can develop that beachhead.
The tricky part, though, is, the whole strategy and concept behind the beachhead is we're going to claim one place, we're going to win that first, we're going to dominate and own it, and then we'll move on and move on and move on. So they didn't land at 10 different little beaches around France. They landed in one place, right? Which is tricky. And that makes me think, is there such a thing? And with what we do, is there a single starting point that we can go in and win and dominate and use it as a launching, to stage, here's how we go through the rest of the industry?
Or have you already done that?
Explain that.
Another concern is, as we always attack, we look like guerrilla warfare. We always come at them from every side. We're not organized. We're not a country. We're not like when you're just defining your sandboxes there, Tracy, you can do that because everybody that was listening to you is basically inside your trusted circle. But we're all coming from different trusted circles, and I think that's a problem. So to the people on the beach, we look like guerrilla warfare. There's people over here attacking us. There's people there attacking us. People pushing, flying.
That doesn't work. That's not a beachhead strategy then.
Yep,
Right.
yep.
It's
Yeah.
chaotic.
Good point. But that's who we are.
Right. So the the context of this, the way I was thinking about this list, the context of this is not for each of us individually on the panel and in the audience to figure out what it's not about my beachhead, it's about our collective beachhead.
That's right. So I think
Right.
we all have
So
to
we've got to
join
figure
together.
that out, and therefore we have to treat it that way. We have to ask these questions in that context.
I think that one of the things, the title was the beachhead for smart buildings. And I think, we have come some way. It wasn't that long ago where I think controls and BAS was considered a necessary evil. Now I think people feel it's really necessary because somehow they've got to get access to the information somehow. And I think if we are considering this and we need a beachhead, if you go back to the beachhead you're describing there, there was a defense, and they were doing it to actually help liberate. So there was a push and a pull. And I think what we got to consider here is combining the whole thing. Well, what is it that the incumbents want? They actually want perhaps now some of those services. They do want to hook up to BIM. They do want to actually get less downtime by getting data into the hands of people who know what to do with it, as opposed to the BA supervisor being in the basement with 500 alarms. Let's put the data out there. And so this kind of final link of getting the data from site to the cloud, we've got to look at those services and see how we can actually join up with that to actually get the push and the pull across from the beachhead for that smart buildings. And I feel it's something, if we're going to do that, then it's kind of saying, okay, this is what we're going to be offering as an industry, is that link to provide the managed services that Steve talked about as well, that hopefully the customer is now beginning to ask and look for, because he is getting smarter.
Didn't we try, here's the question. Did we have a beachhead 5 to 8 years ago, and that beachhead was energy?
Right.
There was nothing, you could not pick up any industry information, whether it be magazines, automated buildings, people's marketing speak, whatever, and it was energy. Everybody talked about it. So we did have a beachhead. So I get, in my opinion. So I guess the question is, was that successful? And I don't know, was it successful?
It's a really great
Go back
question,
to-
Mark. Let me jump in real quick. It's a great question. This is language again. Is there already been a beachhead established? Because as an industry outsider, y'all ain't never gonna be coordinated. I guarantee it. All right. And
Thank you, Bill.
is there already that beachhead, Mark, and energy was it that laid the groundwork for all these companies, as Jim talks about, coming out of Australia and everything else? So I'm wondering, Anto, if we're beyond beachhead.
I think that's really interesting point. Think, because we compare to the whole beachhead analogy, and the whole D-Day beachhead did, launch a success, but you could have, and I'm sure throughout the history of warfare, there's lots of places people took the beach and stayed there for years and years and years and never had the same effect. So does it really? Yeah, I think we've established lots of beachheads as hundreds, if not thousands, of case studies of what can be done for building owners. And so, yeah, I think that may be another problem here, is the beachhead thing might not be as clear a match for what we're trying to accomplish than it is for Jeffrey Moore.
Or maybe we weren't filtering the beachhead. We were actually selecting the right beachhead. Maybe that was the problem 10 years ago.
Well,
I think that there's a time constant to play off of what John just said. If you look, we hit the beach, we hit it hard, but our industry moves so slowly that by the time we got a decent foothold, we were fighting the Russians instead of the Germans, right?
Yeah.
You know, as soon as World War II ended, the Cold War started. And I think that's the key thing that I want to bring out here. What happened to us in our journey here was we hit the beachhead and we had a lot of success. And then the customer went away. But what do I mean by that? I mean, their jobs were outsourced, right? So a model where we had identified the customer and hit the beachhead was great. And then suddenly those people all either didn't have jobs or worked for a large outsourced company. So I think that it's really important for us to talk about that access to the customer and who the customer is. Because once again, all the different people on the phone don't have the same customer. People that are selling controls into new construction have a very different customer than the kinds of analytics or smart services value props that we're talking about.
That's good.
But that also, the following book after Crossing the Chasm was the bowling pin thing. Maybe we didn't do that part. Maybe we did the energy and we kind of sat back and said, yay.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't really develop from that.
Part of the challenge is you have to plot this almost in 3 dimensions, right? When we won our original beachhead, we didn't have the technology we needed to continue to go to data and AI and so forth. So we had to wait for that part to keep up. So there's really another dimension that we've been battling with this. So it's a little different than a battle where you go in and then that's it. You know, it's immediate action. You have everything you need to move forward. We didn't have all the tools even 5 years ago, hardly, so let alone 10 years ago.
That's the message of General Magic, is that you can have all the right ideas, but if you're there too soon, and as soon as the pieces all fell in, it became so obvious what they were trying to do 15 years before. And that's why I think it's a good parallel for us to look at. I think we're at that stage. The other thing I want to mention quickly is there have been beachheads in our industry, which are kind of interesting. I would call BACnet was a beachhead in our industry that we all rallied around, and it had to change a lot of people's opinion, and it created a lot of unification. And generally speaking, everybody on the screen supports BACnet. It was a tough fight. The more recent one, of course, is Project Haystack. So we've had those internal beachheads, but you're talking about an external beachhead, correct? Which is
I'm not sure that BACnet or Haystack are beachheads. They are technologies that's trying to find a beachhead. A beachhead is an audience by definition. BACnet and Haystack and others are actually technologies that we're trying to get to that audience.
And they struggled. Look how long it took, right?
Yeah, and if you look at the audience, well, let's look at buildings per se. Let's go back again, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. People took buildings for granted. I walked in, it was cool, it was warm, it was fine, the lights were on, I got to my office, no big deal. All right, today, and again, people took it as, it's there, it works, I'm not worrying about it, I don't care. But now, the whole operational discussion, the financial side, the occupant experience, all the stuff we all have been talking about now for a long time has caused a paradigm shift in that building now has become a true asset, that it needs to be managed properly, no more taking it for granted. That's how I look at it.
So you've just increased the pain. The first item on my list was the pain, right? Basically, from 5 years ago to today, the pain of the general population about what building is actually increased from absolutely none to it's painful.
Mark, do you think that's true of all segments? So retail versus manufacturing versus commercial office space?
Less in retail, but for the other segments, yes, I do.
It might
And
be
that's
a
the, that's the
about
trick of finding, that's the trick of finding the beachhead, is finding the one that
Right.
has the highest pain.
And
Exactly.
remember,
That's why
we
I bring
can
it up.
define our audience. When they set into Normandy, they weren't trying to conquer the world. They weren't thinking they were expanding that invasion to Tokyo the day after, right? So we have to put some parameters around our beachhead is here. This is what we're going for, right? And each of us in our businesses, the size of that, the niche of that, the vertical industry of that is a little bit different. And maybe we're trying to say, okay, what does it take to have a beachhead that we're going to conquer the entire world, every application, every vertical where a building is used? I think that's outside of the scope here, right? I think the idea is we pick a vertical that any one of us can, here's the beachhead, here's how we dominate the vertical. And the vertical might be super small, like I said before, it could be just baseball stadiums in the US, or it could be all kinds of sports stadiums, in the US or over the world. So we have to still be careful about how we kind of scope that overall, target, so to speak.
But
So let's, sorry, Roger, I was going to try and build on what Mark was saying about the buildings are now more of a, maybe not top of mind, but, increase. And maybe that's the way to do it, is figure out which types of buildings the pain is increased. So that then gets past the line number one.
Back to Mark's comments. So the person now walks into the building like this.
Yes.
And what can I see on my phone? And what can I do with my phone? What in this building can I not do that I can do on my phone? So we're having quite a different conversation. The person before walked in looking at the building. They come from a virtual environment into the building. They want everything they have in their virtual environment and more.
So Chad just posted, he feels the beachhead audience is the youth, which is a generational kind of comment.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. That's the long view on this whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard, and I think I've even said sometimes when I do presentations that a lot of the stuff that we've been preaching in terms of smart buildings and that technology is generational, right? You have to sort of wait for the generation that's comfortable walking into the building that way to really be the pragmatists in this whole thing.
But isn't
right?
and I'd agree with that, Tracy, but I think also that surely from the other end, the recipients, whether they're customers or whether they're, people in the buildings, it's got to be a necessity for them to actually want it. We've got to create something they want. In the Normandy thing is, people wanted liberation, but I think we've got to be actually create something that ties into the smart building. And if that thing is the ability for to give well-being to the customers' staff or the people in the building, and they are the youth, they are the people, and therefore it's dependent, the data from site, from the control system, the BAS, through to the services they're going to provide are a necessity. That could be, hooking into one of those things, whatever it is, out of that long list of, that we could provide in a building. Is that a route forward?
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves too, right, guys? Or get too big for ourselves. Back to Tracy's point about the youth walking in with the experience, and they have a term for it in APAC, and they call it the whole user journey, right? And one of the reasons that the big tech guys want to get into the space is that when you leave your home and you leave your computer, they lost visibility of you. And they want to own that whole journey. And that whole journey is you driving to work, your route to work, your parking experience, the elevator experience, going into that building, ordering lunch from the cafeteria, knowing when lights are going. There's a whole experience of which we're only a part, right? When they talk about smart buildings, we can only provide a part of that experience. They're looking to that bigger user experience, but we have to play in that space. We're not going to be it in that smart building world.
Now, where are they getting the information from, though, Anna? Because all the guys are providing those smart services are not, they get to the front door, they don't know how to get the data out. There's an industry there that actually has the data. A lot of that is tied in by the BAS, not all of it, because space sensors and other things may be separate. But
Yeah,
a lot of
there's a
it
new
comes from
term.
the BAS.
There's a new term they're banding around out there now. They call it a CDE, Common Data Environment. New word for data lakes, new word for cloud. But they're calling it Common Data Environments. I saw a spec just last week where they're putting a big common data environment on top of a platform that I would have expected would have been the common data environment, and they said no, that's not it. And it's a company that we all know, and I was like flabbergasted that they weren't taking that as the solution. And they said no, it's a bigger thing.
Who owns that? Who owns that, Anno?
The new lake or
the one whatever you just threw
the
out.
common data environment.
Yeah.
Common data
Is it owned
environment.
by the
CDE.
common man and woman?
The commons is an entity of all of us.
And who has
in
access
their
to it?
particular case,
privacy, all of that. How do you, lots of open
oh
questions.
yeah, I mean it's a complex problem. It's a complex problem. Yeah, I mean it's a very deep problem. But again, in our world, for the things that we control, they see there's much, there's a much bigger question there, right?
So another thought occurred to me, talking about the youth and that being a long game, which it is. The problem is that beachhead, by definition, isn't a long game, right? It's a strategy to get there, right?
What
So
win today, right?
win today, or in a relatively short period of time. So while youth may be, as Anno pointed out, the bigger audience behind the beachhead, what is the beachhead to get to the youth?
Exactly.
Right? And I only know one word to the answer to that: schools.
Cool.
Schools? Where do youth come from? They come from school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but when my daughter picks up the phone and she operates, I don't know, 50 apps, she never went to school to learn those 50 apps. Yeah. She just picked it up and ran with it. Right? You don't have to teach them; they just have to work.
So I want to pick up on something that Ken said. The next generation people want to come into the building and use their virtual experience to access everything. So it's up to them to create the pain for the building owner, not for us. We have the solution. So if they really want that, and that's the trend of the future, our building owner is ready to understand and make the investment to enable their systems to even do it, to enable that person to control the HVAC in their space, right? Which might require capital expense because the building wasn't zoned that way, or two zones are off of a single VAV box. We've never seen that, right? Are the building owners and operators seeing that pain around the environmental infrastructure we focus on, or are they seeing it around, making sure that there's, a desk or, the things that are softer and easier to provide a virtual experience around, reserve the desk, reserve this, reserve a meeting room. Great. But what about the harder stuff? All right.
In Donnie Walker's presentation at ControlCon, he very much believes in that. He believes that experience is part of his mechanical design, that he has to not only do the designing as John describes to a personal level, but he has to provide the mobile experience to go with that. And what he shows is that the mobile experience is much more significant than the whole piece of the pie that we do, or at least equal anyway. And they have to be able to hand off to each other. So he's one of the enlightened designers that is actually making that happen. Actually, when Donnie was here, he never talked about that, but that was a great conversation that he carried on at the ControlCon.
So with this, how again, cybersecurity, how does our industry address this with respect to cybersecurity? I've got 500 people in my office. Everybody's got the mobile apps. And again, I'm all for it. Don't get me wrong. All right. How do we ensure cybersecurity? That, Anto leaves. Wait a minute, hold on. Anto's part of it. He leaves. Now, obviously, we have to not allow him to have access to what he had before, understandably. But again, we are opening up a whole new thing.
That's a technology solvable problem. It may not be easy, but that's not
Right. Yeah, but
not a
again,
structural thing.
it's part of
Yes.
the solution. It has
It's part of the whole product.
Yeah, correct.
That cannot be asked by the
Correct.
person who has pain.
In Donnie's example, it was how you got into the building.
And Bill, to give Bill toasty box. I'm not saying that's one. That's fine. All right, that's fine.
It's the
But that's
best.
not the whole answer.
It's, yeah.
Going
You know,
back
you
to what
mentioned
John
Donnie
said.
Walker as one of the enlightened consultants. My question was, are there enlightened owners out there, and how many? Is there enough that are ready to make the changes in their mechanical system designs to support that future that supposedly the occupants want?
Yeah,
Don't
so,
forget, John, in your
so
statement,
so
there
from a
are
beach,
op-
sorry, go ahead.
All right, Roger.
Yeah, sorry, what I was going to go from John, from what you were saying. Of course, the occupants are not mostly now not the owners, and
Right.
so there's this chain of where the staff have got to be pushing the occupants, who then have got to start pushing the owners to change the building because they may have a short lease. So it's somehow you got to go through that chain. If the occupants, as we've already said, are expecting to be able to walk in to a great environment, they've got to be demanding that from their management, who are the occupiers. And the only people they don't have control over the building. They've got to go to the owner to actually get that modification to the building to actually satisfy, their staff's needs.
Yeah, so that, to pick up on what Roger and John are saying is, I'm just, and what you were saying, Anto, is that the office building market, that's going to be the one that's going to experience that pain the most? Might it be retail, people going into stores? Is there a segment where we feel that the occupants are going to be the most demanding, such that the owners are then going to take notice and want to come up with an answer?
One way of thinking about that, I was just mulling this in my head, is that that may be down to the option, or the whether the occupants actually have a choice whether they're there or not. Right. So if you take prisons, for example, and I don't even know if there is such a thing as smart prisons, but prisons, the occupants don't have a choice to be there, right? And schools are the same, hospitals are the same, and there are probably other sectors are the same. So it's very different to office workers, where you're always trying to incent, and retail, where you're trying to incentivize people to come in. There are other sectors where they don't have that choice. Maybe that's one way of filtering.
So maybe we can put some parameters here around things that look like the right kind of candidate.
Just of interest, I just took a quick look at the building articles for the June issue, and I think about 5 up, and 4 of them address the occupant. They're not talking about technology, they're talking about how do we better serve the occupant. I guess an interesting trend.
I'm leaning, based on all this conversation, is that the beachhead is the occupant. We want to find the squeaky wheels occupants, focus on meeting their needs, and driving our solution to tailor to their requirements.
Maybe the way to put it is the occupants that are basically causing the building owner operator pain.
That's it.
Is that one way of thinking about it?
Yeah, right.
Ultimately, it comes down to who has the most to gain out of this, right? Or the most to protect. So is that a primary target, or is that a secondary target?
And we're at the top of the hour, so maybe that's a good place to leave it for today. But this has been a great conversation. Anybody want to have last words before we wrap up? Silence.
Wow, measure.
It's all yours.
Yeah. So it's been interesting. I think this will be a good sort of lead to however we structure June, which we'll be figuring out over the next couple of weeks. So with that, let's bring this to a wrap and wish everybody a great Memorial weekend next weekend. And I think this is when you start having barbecues. Is that right? This is the
That's the
official
one.
barbecue? Or
It's swimming
parade?
pools.
Swimming pool, yeah, that's it.
All right.
All right, so with that, video will be up tomorrow, and have a great week, and bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey, guys.
Bye.
Later.
Bye, guys.